So it is 12 o'clock and I'm going to get started. And some of you I know have known me pretty well. No, won't mention any names like Karen and Kirsten, but some of you don't. And I don't believe in bios because if you can Google and if you signed up for this, you know enough that to assume that I'm not some crazy lunatic just talking about whatever. But I want to tell you something that don't usually share, but it helps explain why I'm here and my approach to education. And those of you may know, I have a PhD in communication studies. It's a generalized communication repertoire, shall we say. When I was in grad school, for that, everybody told me, oh, you should study health communication. That's where the money is, and do a study on diphtheria communication or AIDS. And that's exactly not what I wanted to do. But I want you to know that one of the big reasons I left university, because I taught at East Carolina University and College of Charleston. I don't believe in tenure. I don't believe, I think it's something that's seriously wrong with our higher education system. I think it's one of the reasons why our education costs so much. And I know for sure that's why the academic textbooks are such a scam. And I want you to know that Aristotle was the first communication coach. He was the tutor to Alexander the Great. And then, of course, Aristotle was the student of Socrates, who was a student of Plato, and all those guys had their own schools, and they were the best. And their students paid them because they got results. And that's my approach too, that I want to teach you stuff that is practical, that's going to make your life better. Otherwise, what's the point? So that's just a little bit about me. So I'm going to pull up slides that I prepared. I just prepared a few slides on our topic, which is about responding positively to negative feedback. And, I need to push the share slide button. And here we go. So why this topic? As I was telling Kirsten, she was the first one on, this is a little bit personal because it really gets into, well, first of all, nobody likes negative feedback, and even talking about it is a little bit sensitive. So it's just like not a popular topic, but I see that in my private coaching practice. And again, just for those of you who don't know me that well, my business model is roughly half private coaching clients who are either business owners or corporate middle management, director level, or in companies where I teach classes or do a little bit of fixing people. And what I've noticed over the years is that a lot of what I do is helping people respond more elegantly and gracefully to negative feedback. And a lot of times what is perceived as negative feedback is not even negative feedback. It's just that negativity bias kicking in. But it's a great opportunity to kind of figure this piece out, this piece that I don't ever see anybody talking about it. I don't see very many articles on this topic. So I think it's a great opportunity for people who are interested in being, moving ahead with your career, whether you're in corporate or you have your own business. Let's see. This is sometimes how I feel about negative feedback. I can get really upset, start crying. And then, but this is mostly me, like, how dare you say that? So just a little bit. All right. So the first thing about negative feedback is that you have to separate the messenger from the message. And I think that's why we have the expression, don't kill the messenger. So no matter what, you have to treat these two things separately. It's got that little separation bar, because a lot of times we associate this message with this person, and that makes us not like the person or reject the person or avoid the person. And not everybody that gives you negative feedback do you want to pursue a relationship with, but you absolutely must separate the two. And really, when I was coming up with this topic and preparing this content, I was thinking about, you ask for promotion or raise and you don't get it. You ask for a job and you don't get it. You apply to speak in an event and you don't get it. You try to make a sale and you don't get it. You ask for funding and you don't get it. So those are the scenarios that I had in mind. And the thing is, normally somebody will be so disappointed by the no that they lose this opportunity, because you have this opportunity to put the pieces in place to extend the relationship, to build the relationship, and of course to get better at what you're doing. So if you only take one thing away from today, is that you want to, when you're getting unwanted feedback from someone that is of interest to you, you need to just separate that feedback, deal with it later emotionally, and immediately respond with thank you for taking your time, I appreciate this. And here's an example of from my life. So I have this client in North Carolina that's been my best client over the years. I mean, they are the best for me. They've been fast growing. They're big enough to need a leadership communication training, but not big enough to have their own training department. Their people are very, it's a knowledge base. I work a lot with what I call brainiacs. They're scientists and chemists and so forth. And they were acquired in 2014 by this Australian company. So I was not sure if I was going to make it to keep working with them with the new ownership. And so I met with their vice president of human resources, and we had a nice meeting, and I brought him some peaches from South Carolina. And, it was a nice meeting, but you never know with these things. And, of course, I would reach out to him periodically and never hear anything. And then once he asked for information to give a class, and I gave it to him and never heard from him. I called him and I emailed him, and he totally ghosted me. So I got on the phone, got his answering service, and just said, thank you so much for considering me. I really appreciate it. I would like to talk to you about what I presented, but I understand you're busy. I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to have submitted. I'm here for you. And typically the guy ghosted me, but he did call me back. It was several months later, and that's his modus operandi. That's his MO. When he needs something, he, calls me 2 to 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks ahead of time. He gives me like this much information, a teeny bit of information about what he needs, and I deliver based on that. And that's been since 2014. So 5 years, but the guy was giving me, and that's another thing. Sometimes silence is a form of negative feedback, but you've got to not let it derail you. Oh, there's my little special effects. Laura was playing with PowerPoint. All right, so let's analyze, filter the feedback. That's so important. Not all feedback is equal. And in fact, most negative feedback that you get, you should ignore. And this slide is on your, if you downloaded the worksheet, this is a black and white printed copy, it's on here. So the first point is what I was just going over, was separating the feedback from the messenger. Because what I see happen so many times is that my clients will call me with these situations where they've gotten negative feedback, and they're just so wrapped up on what it means about what the person thinks about them and their worth, and they're just like, that's just taking it way too far. So consider the source. Like if it's anonymous, completely ignore it. If it's feedback from a person that you would not want to trade places with, ignore it. So most feedback you're just going to ignore. And also, is it solicited? Free advice. I'm giving free advice, but you guys signed up for it. You invested your time, but unsolicited advice, there might be some truth in it, and that is also true. If it's someone that knows you, no matter what the message is, there might be some truth in it, but you have to decide whether to act on it or not. But consider that, some people are just criticizers. There's that personality type that is always looking for what's wrong with people, and that's just their modus operandi. It doesn't mean that they don't like you or don't see your potential or your value. It's just they have this habit of always commenting on what they see as negative. Okay, number 3, everybody has an agenda. So is this feedback from somebody who is really trying to make the company better, add value? Or is it agenda of somebody's trying to take the path of least resistance? Very common. And sometimes you don't even know their agenda. And then number 4, is it real? Because sometimes you invent negative feedback. I'm not kidding. And I'm going to share a story for the last webinar was about storytelling, and Amanda had helped me find some of my stories. And this was one, I don't think I shared it last time, but it showed how I created some negative feedback in my personal life when my kids were young. And their dad used to travel a lot and for long periods of time. 2 weeks, because it was international. And one time I had 3 kids, 7 and under. Then I say that because to help explain the next step of the story. So he was coming home, and I decided the ultimate declaration of love was that I was going to have these chocolate chip cookies, which I knew he loved. Who doesn't like freshly baked chocolate chip cookies? And they were going to be just coming out of the oven as he walked in the door. So for me at that time, that took a lot of planning, make sure I had the ingredients, find out if his plane's on time. He had an 1.5-hour drive from the airport, make sure he wasn't going to stop. And yes, he walked in the door, and I was just taking out these cookies. And of course, the house had to have smelled really good, right? He never mentioned them. He didn't say, "Oh, it smells good," or "Let me have a cookie." He just did not mention them at all, which is fine. Looking back, I say, well, of course he didn't, because he was so happy to see his family and his kids and his wife. And he just wasn't tuned into the cookies. But I took it as, this man does not value me. He doesn't appreciate me. I did all this work to get these cookies ready, and he didn't even notice. So there might have been some truth in that also, but really it was a story that I made up and made me feel bad. And I use that as a filter in interpreting future interactions. Okay, number 5 is actionable, because a lot of times you'll get feedback that's actually true, but there's not much you can do about it. And one recent example I have is about my nose. There's this guy on Instagram that keeps saying what a huge nose I have, which may be true. I can have plastic surgery, but I'm not really up for that. So I don't consider that very actionable feedback. But on a more down-to-earth, work-related context, every time I do a workshop, I make the people do the evaluation on paper in front of me, because I know if I send them the link, very few people will answer it. And I still don't get 100%. But I'll get a lot of suggestions that just really are not actionable. They're good, oh, you should tell more stories. Or so sometimes I tell more stories, and then people say, oh, you're telling too many stories. if it's not specific, it's hard to act on that. So I'm going to stop the slides for a second, because I've been talking and talking, and I want to know what your reaction is. Like, do you have any questions? Do you have any comments? What do you think of what we've covered so far? We're about halfway through the material. One of the main points have been to separate the message from the messenger, and to analyze, filter out your feedback. What kind of feedback should you pay attention to? And then we're going to go into, like, what does this really mean for you? So do you have any comments? Please, in the comment box, feel free to write things. I would love to hear from you. And then I'll go back to my slides, but I did want to give a pause. Any questions in the comments? Is this just so overwhelming and enlightening? Okay. Oh, here we go. How much is emotional interpretation? Funny you should ask that. We are going to go into that, but just briefly, I mean, think about it. If you're tired, feeling insecure, you're going to take a negative emotional interpretation just because of your physical state or emotional state. I agree with your approach. It is not always easy to separate the messenger from the message. Absolutely, it's not. And then some messengers, this is Kirsten. I know we know each other a long time. I know she won't mind my using Kirsten. Yes, so true. And some messengers, like, we don't care. We don't care what they say. And even it can be people that this is what my slogan is, or my motto is, for like people that you work with that you don't particularly enjoy, or they give you a lot of negative feedback. Make it work for you. Like, how can I navigate this relationship despite the fact that this person is giving me negative feedback? But it is hard. And how much is emotional? Yeah, that has to do more with you. So I'm gonna go through a process that's on this worksheet if you downloaded it or looked at it. But if you didn't, that's fine. I'm gonna show you a slide with it. All right, so I'm gonna go back to our slides, which means share. Oh, here. I once had an executive coach who asked us to use the rule, always assume positive intent. Yes, it does take practice. And you can assume that even if you know that there's no positive intent. Because what we do know is that everybody's doing the best that they can with what they know at any particular moment. And even if they're out to get you for real, that's because that's the best they know right now. Yes. That's a very good point. All right, thank you, and I want to say thank you all for showing up, by the way. So yes, we all have negativity bias, and that's always going to affect us. I just had published in Forbes this article about 4 specific ways that negativity bias affects you, which ties into the emotional part. But the negativity bias, which is in us for our own good, so that we are survivors as human beings, we pay attention to things. But that means that you're always going to harp more on, or focus more on what the negative says. So if it's a performance review and your boss says 7 great things and 2 bad things, or opportunities as we call them, you're going to focus on those 2 things. I mean, it's the same. I've trained myself, like even me, the communication coach, when I get feedback from my webinars, it's pretty easy, but with a large audience in a workshop, I have to wait till I don't look at the evaluations usually right away. I'll wait till I've had a moment to rest and maybe have something to drink or have some coffee and sit down and just kind of go through it. But negativity bias is always affecting how you interpret things, everything. And this is negative. One of the things I pointed out in this article that also is related to the negative feedback is that if you have a bad attitude about any negative feedback, it's going to make you less risk tolerant, and you cannot progress without taking some risk. All right, so the emotional side. So think about it. All of the bad feelings that we have, even if somebody has bad intentions, like they really want to bring us down, our fear or feeling inadequate or fraudulent or imposter or that we're not good enough, all of that comes not from what the person says, but from our story about it or our interpretation about it. And that is, I don't expect you to walk away from this 30-minute webinar fully in command of this practice, because it's really mind-blowing. And I've been working on this for a long time, but it's your story. It's how you're interpreting. Even if it's true, it still doesn't necessarily, I mean, because we're all flawed human beings, right? We all have things to work on, but we all have the ability to learn. We all have the ability to get better. And there's so much, we offer so much value just by the way we show up. But if you're allowing negative feedback to make you defensive, to make you, smoldering, bad mood, bad vibes, then you are letting that impede your progress as a professional and as a person. And then if you're the kind of person, you can't tell Laura anything, she'll, start crying or she'll get angry, then you're also blocking yourself from progress in your career. And you want to be the kind of person that people can tell anything to. All right. So remember, the feelings are not from what the person says, but what you say about that to yourself. So this is in the sheet here. So if you have some negative feedback that you need to process, you can just write it's SIFAR, situation, interpretation, feelings, actions, and results. As you have a situation, or the situation can be the message. So the message could be, the message could be that you didn't get the job. You interviewed, you can do it. For whatever reason, you didn't get the job. So how do you interpret that? If you tell yourself, this was a perfect fit, I didn't succeed in selling myself. I'll probably never be able to do that. If I didn't get this job, why would I be able to get another job? Or I am in Charleston, so a lot of times I hear these generalizations about Charleston. In Charleston, there's one, you can't find a man to date if you're a single woman in Charleston, or the job market is terrible, or the pay is terrible in Charleston. So sometimes Charleston is the scapegoat or the victim. But whatever your story is that determines how you're feeling. Like, are you feeling like, okay, I didn't get this job, I really wanted it, I gave it my best, what can I do differently? How can I learn? How can I prepare better for the next one? Or if I'm feeling deflated, if I'm feeling inadequate, if I'm feeling depressed, then I'm not likely to take action to resolve my job situation. So that's where the feelings drive the actions. And then the actions drive the results. So if I have this job interview and I don't get the job, and I tell myself it's because I'm unhireable at this level, I'm too old, I'm too young, I have a humanities background, and I act accordingly, which is to withdraw or to be defensive or to not try as hard, then I'm going to definitely get that result that matches my story. Does that make sense? So here's the second thing. Remember, the first thing that I want you to get is to separate the message from the messenger. And if the messenger is somebody that you respect or you think has potential as a friend or a colleague, you always want to move that relationship forward. So that's why even when people tell you no, you want to find ways to keep in touch, to let them know that you appreciate being considered, and there is no try. Remember, that's what Yoda says. Try, there is none, or something. Move the relationship forward. Now, if you're getting anonymous feedback or feedback from your sister-in-law or a colleague at work who's just the office Debbie Downer, I mean, you don't really need to worry about that. So let's see what questions do people have about this. This is just a quick outline. I can go through other examples. Okay, what if you think they are wrong in their assessment? How can you rebut without, how can you argue with it? Well, first of all, you can say something like, that's an interesting way of looking at it. Could you give me an example? So you want to ask them for examples, specific examples, and then you want to say, not, you're an idiot, even if they are an idiot. As I say, just because something is true doesn't mean you need to say it. That's an interesting way of looking at it. For example, let's say that if I go to a party with extended family and somebody, probably after drinking too much alcohol, says, you know, Laura, people think that you look a lot older than you really are. Like, what can you even do with that? But I can say, I think you've had too much to drink, but you couldn't do that at office. But I can say that's an interesting point of view. I think that's probably too much information, and change the subject. But yes, Lori, if they are wrong, and probably they are, or there may, probably there's this teeny tiny bit of truth that it may be misperceived, but ask for specific examples and then say, well, can I explain why I did that? Can I explain what was going through my mind when I did this thing? Does that help? Because I mean, it's different if you're accused of something that you didn't do at all. I've been there too, and that is a lot more serious. Usually it's a matter of perception. Yes, that's helpful. Okay, good. Yeah. I mean, if you're accused of being late and you're not, then that's a different situation, and that's much worse, but that's less common. Any other questions about feedback? I know if you signed up for this, you might have something specific in mind. Let me see if there's any, just put the questions in the chat, or any comments, any experiences. The thing is, this is what was really driving me to put this together, is that the fear of negative feedback can hold you back. For example, one of the things that you're getting all this coaching advice for free, so take advantage. If you want to move forward in your career, okay, then we'll do the tips for offering negative feedback. Speaking at conferences is a great way to do that because it gives you greater visibility. But to speak at a conference, you have to apply, and to apply means you might get a no. And a lot of people don't want to apply because they're afraid that they will not be able to handle it if they're told no. But that not being able to handle it is just totally mythical. Of course you can handle it. You can handle anything. And if you get a grip on that, then you cannot let the feedback bother you. And I want to say one more thing. When I was looking for gifts, GIF, not presents, about rejection, almost all of them showed men being rejected by women. So I think men get more experience in their youth getting rejected. Is because they are the ones, at least up until recently who had to ask the girl out. So I do think that that affects women in the work as far as moving ahead. Okay, for offering negative feedback, shared objective. I'm telling you this because I want you to succeed. Even there are studies that show in like the situation where there's a white teacher in an underprivileged school where their students are all people of color, and how do you give negative feedback without the child thinking that you're just out to get them? And the recommendation from the study was to say, I'll just use the word Helga. So Helga, I have high standards for you, and I know you can reach them. And that's why I'm telling you this. So that may or may not be applicable in your specific work situation, but go to your shared objective. It's not, and I have this tool called contrasting, which is what I do want from this and what I don't want. I'm not trying to put you down. I don't enjoy giving criticism. I'm not a nitpicker, but what I do want is our team to work better together, or you and I to work better together, and this is what I'm seeing. All right, so that's my takeaway, is to go to the shared objective. That's a little bit different from the sandwich of the good, bad, good. And I will mention just one more thing, that high-performing teams have a ratio of bad comments, negative comments. I mean, positive to negative. Positive 5, negative 1. So what you want to make sure, because people will reject your negative feedback no matter how you slice and dice it, if that's all they hear from you. You will be discounted. All right, we just had a performance review process, and I got some meaty feedback. That's a good adjective. My challenge right now is separating the feedback from the work. That's going to your story. What is that telling you? You are not perfect. I'm not perfect. This webinar is not perfect. So the only way we can get better, because we're all operating at the best that we know how at this moment, and we all have blind spots. So look at that meaty feedback and think about, I don't know if it was a 360 or if it's just from your boss, and see, is this person, because there's like people that grade hard and people that grade easily. So a lot of times the feedback reflects the person. Like if it's a very critical feedback, that person is probably very critical of themselves also. So that's something. From your business partners. Okay, separating the feedback from the worth. Well, that's a definitely challenging situation to get that kind of feedback from your partners, but they are interested, I am assuming, in the good of the operation. And you can just think of it as suggestions, and you could try it, see if what, because sometimes when people make suggestions, they actually are good, and sometimes they're not. So I would just I'm going to see experiment. That's what I would do. Experiment using their suggestions or the feedback. And if they're saying you're doing this wrong, and they're not giving you how to get out of that, you need to go talk to them or call me. Does that sound helpful? All right, good. I like that. Anybody else have any questions about the feedback? What I want is for you not to be afraid of it. I don't want you to run away from it. I want you to even seek it. Oh, and here, Laura, think about this too, with all of you, with your teams especially, because feedback is something that's giving and receiving. The people who have a hard time receiving it often always have a hard time giving it. I mean, me before in the past. And the people who dish it out usually can take it pretty well. But you can always ask, what can I do differently to get better results? Even if it's your reports, how can I communicate with you differently? What would you like for me to do differently in order that our team is more successful? So that's what I hate, the performance reviews that are just once a year. I think that's really a kind of a waste of time. You may be getting like this tsunami of feedback that's just too much to take in. I don't know. But as a practice, everybody, I really recommend regularly asking, what can I do better? And that's the purpose of the surveys that I send out after every webinar, is like, what can I do better? So anyway, I will give you, anybody else have a question? Otherwise, I'm going to wrap it up. Of course, you know, if you want to go more into this topic, I'm for hire me. And I'm even going to do my first, I mean, I haven't, it's not my first, but this year I'm doing trainings for the first time via webinar, like kind of like this, but more structured and more organized. All right, everybody, have a great day. Thank you so much for showing up and sharing your lunch, half of your lunch time, or probably your whole lunch time with me. And I appreciate it. Next topic for the one that's going to be in 2 weeks is about negotiating. I have a friend who is a former investment banker, and he's going to give us the lowdown on negotiating. So that's it. I will end this and see you later. Bye-bye.